days. My name is Gaukhar Nurgalieva. I am the senior advisor at FMA, a firm that does government advisory, fiscal policies, economic policies, investment strategy consulting. I am happy to present today our speakers, distinguished women in the field of finance, Ms. Madina Abylkassymova, chairwoman of the Agency of the Republic of Kazakhstan for Regulation and Development of the Financial Markets, Mrs. Zsuzsanna Hargitai, managing director, Central Asia, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Ms. Julia Monaco, managing director of the Global Head for Public Sector Corporate and Investment Banking, City Public Sector Group, and Ms. Alina Anikina, chairwoman of the Management Board, Alpha Bank Kazakhstan. Welcome to all the speakers, and once again, good evening to the audience. I would just like to begin the session with the good news about women in finance by quoting Deputy CEO of the Societe Generale, Dione Libot, who said that this is the first time we can say that things are changing, really changing. Yes, the progress in numbers is too slow. Nonetheless, everyone is finally getting impatient with advancement of women. And to validate that statement of hers, I would like to just go over briefly about remarkable women in finance that we see as now as the Secretary of U.S. Treasury, Janet Yellen, Kristalina Georgieva as the Managing Director of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, the President of the European Central Bank, and of course the first ever CEO of the city in its history, Jane Fraser. I believe these appointments of remarkable women professionals at the helm of the largest financial organizations in the world signal about the developments in women in finance. Nonetheless, according to the various research consulting companies, the average of women in executive committees and the boards, the global average is at 20%. The number in Central Asia and the Middle East, unfortunately, is on the lower side. And with that, I would like to begin our session and propose our first words to Ms. Abylkassymova. Please, would you tell us about the situation of women in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan and Central Asia, in the field of finance?
Thank you very much. Good evening to you all. Dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you at Astana Finance Days, and I'm especially glad to greet you at the session dedicated to the economic empowerment of women. Gender equality and empowerment of women in the economy have become one of the mainstream policy issues on the agenda of governments, businesses, and civil society. Today we have an ample of financial and economic data and evidence suggesting that there are clear benefits of providing equal opportunities to women. Lack of integration of women into economic life limits the growth of the world economy. This is confirmed by the studies of IMF, UN, according to which there is a positive correlation between gender equality and the social and economic development of the country. The UN claims that a society where women have not achieved equal rights and opportunities with men will never be able to achieve sustainable development. When women are limited in the ability to contribute to the economy on an equal basis, we experience low productivity and do not contribute to the reduction of poverty and income inequality. Therefore, the empowerment of women should be perceived as a call for the greatest prosperity of the country. Kazakhstan has also set gender equality as one of its strategic objectives and is taking systemic measures to advance on this issue. According to the global gender gap of the World Economic Forum, Kazakhstan ranks 80th out of 156 countries in the ranking of the gender gap. While there are different ways in which we can measure gender differences, with regards to the economic empowerment of women, the common approach would entail the following dimensions. First, it is important to measure and monitor structure of ownership of businesses by women. According to a study by the World Bank, in Kazakhstan, 30% of companies have women as owners. Another dimension is to look at the representation of women at the decision-making level in the corporate sector. So if you look at today's structure of corporate sector in Kazakhstan, about 26 of all companies have women as their top managers. At the same time, in a small and medium-sized sector, more than 60% of small and medium-sized businesses are headed by women. This is a relatively big number, compared to other developing economies. If we look at the financial sector, it can be noted that financial organizations are among the first to apply global approaches to ensuring gender equality and advanced principles of corporate governance. The level of female representation in the top management of financial sector of our country at the management board and board of directors is 27%. It corresponds to the best practices of international companies. As a policy makers, for us as a policy makers, it is important to consider supporting policies for women economic and financial empowerment. First policy and first area as a financial regulator where we would like to look at and assess economic empowerment of women is in access to capital and credit. Overall, the statistics shows that in developing countries, 70% of women-owned small and medium-sized enterprises are either denied access to financial institutions or cannot obtain the capital that they need. This is a special area of focus in Kazakhstan. We have a number of special programs to develop the potential of women in entrepreneurship. There are plenty of special programs that are being developed together with AIFCs. There is a major state program for the development of women entrepreneurship. It is developed and funded through Damu Fund, and the share of projects headed by women and receiving government support today is 50%, which is total gender equality in terms of access to state support for entrepreneurship. If we look at the special AIFI programs that are being realized here in Kazakhstan, the key programs that I would like to highlight is a European Bank for Reconstruction and Development program called Women in Business. It's been realized since 2015, and under this program, more than 14,000 women entrepreneurs have been financed for nearly $6.5 million. The Asian Development Bank also finances a special program of financial support for women entrepreneurs. It reaches 20,000 of women with a total of $225 million in loans. Under the state program Business Roadmap 2025, today the portfolio includes 10,000 projects for women's entrepreneurship, and the level of subsidies, the percentage of projects being subsidized comprises 48.5% of total number of subsidies. Besides that, it is important to note the initiative of Atamiken Business Chamber, Atamiken National Chamber of Entrepreneurs. They have a special council of business women of Kazakhstan, which supports Women's Entrepreneurship Support Fund. The activities of the fund are aimed at providing microcredits to women in business. It is important that besides direct financial support measures, there are special educational programs to support women's skills development in business. Nazarbayev University Business School runs a special program for women entrepreneurs where they train women on principles of building a business, modeling real business situations, and developing business management skills. To further reduce gender gap in entrepreneurship, I believe it is necessary to develop a targeted policy to reduce barriers for women entrepreneurs. It is important to monitor and assess the situation and understand what are the remaining barriers for women, and support the development implementation of special training programs, including professional advice on such issues as legal and tax issues. Secondly, important area is to ensure financial inclusion for women. According to statistics, women are much more likely to open bank accounts and deposits than men. Today, our statistic shows that the share of women in the total number of bank accounts is over 56%. The share in the number of deposits is over 60%. And in the amount of deposits, the share is 49%. It is important to note that the borrowing discipline of women borrowers is higher than men. The level of overdue debts over 90 days, we also measure these statistics for women, is 44%, which is lower than for men. This shows that the discipline of women is higher. And this is the situation that we see not only in Kazakhstan, we see it around the world. However, even given that the level of financial inclusion for women is relatively high, we still see that women have smaller, in terms of the amounts, we see that women have smaller average bank account balances. We also see that they have fewer opportunities to obtain loans due to the lack of collateral. This is another important issue. It's the issue of access of women or the ownership of women of assets. So overall we see that even if women very often have ownership of certain companies, overall, if you look at female ownership of assets, economic assets within the economy, which can serve as a collateral for credit, usually women have less share of assets. On the part of financial regulators, therefore, it is necessary to develop systemic measures aimed at ensuring the financial independence of women and expanding their access to financial services. Thirdly, important aspect is the financial literacy. It is necessary to narrow the gender gap in financial literacy by developing and implementing initiatives and programs to meet the financial literacy needs of women and to raise their awareness, trust, competence, and skills in financial matters. I would like to conclude by saying that the existing programs that we are running in Kazakhstan together with international financial organizations, the programs that are funded by government, they are all aimed at stimulating the involvement of women in economic activity. And I hope that based on the experience, based on the results of implementation of programs, further new measures will be developed in order to truly empower women and provide them equal access to financial services and to access to capital. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Abylkassymova. And your speech indeed is very encouraging, optimistic. And your role as a leader of the financial regulator of the country is a proof that Kazakhstan is indeed closing in on the gender gap on the global scale. Thank you very much. You mentioned about the role of international financial institutions in women empowerment in the region. I would like to propose our next speaker, Ms. Zsuzsanna Hargitai, who is the managing director of the Central Asia EBRD. I believe that EBRD is one of the leaders in the region for women empowerment programs. Please, Ms. Hargitai, would you share with us the programs that EBRD is taking on in the region, in Kazakhstan, Central Asia, and Eurasia?
Absolutely, Gaukhar. Thank you very much. And may I start by saying that I very much look forward, as I'm settling into my new role, to meet Ms. Abylkassymova, because she mentioned a couple of issues that is very much dear, not only to my heart, but it will be in our new gender strategy of what is the role of financial regulators in terms of providing sex disaggregated data, how to deal with access to collateral, asset-light companies financing. So I look forward to meeting you, Madina, very soon. Back to what EBRD is doing. Of course, I'm very pleased to be able to speak at the Astana Finance Days organized by AIFC. This is an institution EBRD has been associated with for many years now. And although this is still a virtual event, this is the place to meet and discuss matters of importance for key international and domestic decision makers, stakeholders, and friends of Kazakhstan. Let us not forget, I'm also coming from a bank, EBRD, that elected its first female president. And as we speak, our annual meeting is ongoing, yes, also virtually, where our Board of Governors will support our new strategic priorities. And the second priority, you will forgive me, Gaukhar, if I say our number one is still green and climate finance, but number two priority is gender equality, equality of opportunity. So we are ready to step up our engagement in this area. At EBRD, we also believe that sustainable market economies are those that are well-governed, resilient, competitive, green, and inclusive. Fair and full access to job opportunities, market opportunities, is one of the main prerequisites for sustainable and inclusive economic growth, and I hasten to add, to speedy post-COVID recovery. Without proper engagement of women's economic potential, our economies are like engines running at half speed. Now, being a banker, I need to come up with some figures. The EBRD recognizes the importance of inclusion, and our bank has to date invested over 14 billion euros in projects, investments, credit lines, which focus on gender and inclusion matters. They are improving access for women to skills and employment, starting up their businesses, accessing finance, accessing also services and infrastructure. Compared to 2017, we have 50% more inclusive projects these days, and our ambition is, if our Board of Governors and then Board of Directors agree, to reach 40% of all our investments to have what we call gender components. So, as I said, to date, we have presented impressive figures, but we are not sitting on our laurels. We see that women in general and enterprises led by women are disproportionately affected by the pandemic and respective lockdown policies, not only here in Kazakhstan, but worldwide. The pandemic is estimated to push 47 million more women below the poverty line. So there's a material risk of putting years of our common global gender equality and inclusion efforts on hold and even reversing the progress. We can't let it happen. We need strong collaboration and coordination between various governments, development institutions, civil society, and other stakeholders to address this issue. But analysts say if no action is taken, global GDP growth would contract by $1 trillion by 2030. On the contrary, however, by ensuring the post-COVID-19 economic recovery is gender sensitive, global GDP can increase by $13 trillion during the same period. At EBRD, we have a number of tools, as Ms. Abylkassymova also mentioned, and programs to support this drive. Our flagship Women in Business program is helping women with relevant skills, access to finance services that foster their participation in economic activity. Launched across our countries of operations in 2014, it has to date provided more than 650 million euros of funding to women-led SMEs. More than 95,000 women entrepreneurs had received financial and advisory support. 50 partner banks are working with us across 24 economies under the Women in Business umbrella. In Kazakhstan, as mentioned also by Ms. Abylkassymova, we launched this program in 2015. Let me hasten to add that we are grateful to the government of the Republic of Kazakhstan, which is financially supporting this undertaking. Now, according to my data, 6 local financial intermediaries have already provided 22,000 loans worth of 42.5 million tenge to women entrepreneurs across the country. And more than 4,000 women-led MSMEs benefited from EBRD advisory services, including diagnostic studies, regional seminars, training programs, as well as one-to-one advisory coaching and mentoring activities. And just a couple of weeks ago, I signed a $10 million Women in Business loan to one of the country's leading lender, Bank Center Credit. The funds will help promote women's entrepreneurship and business activity, so we look forward to implementation. I would like to mention briefly some other important gender-related activities we have in Kazakhstan. As part of our integrated approach for inclusion in Kazakhstan, we are trying to reduce regulatory barriers for women to work in all types of jobs. We have already helped remove gender restrictions in 75 occupations, and I would like to use this opportunity to thank Madina Abylkassymova, who was Minister of Labor, she still remembers it, back in 2018, who helped us a lot with this work. But she would agree that this job is not finished yet, as we will be aiming to remove similar restrictions for more than 200 professions. Number 2, we are actively helping our clients strengthening their equal opportunities policies and adopt gender action plans. For instance, you might know, you might not, Samruk Energy signed to the UN Women's Empowerment Principles in line with the company's Equal Opportunities Action Plan. And EBRD is working currently with the government of Kazakhstan to develop a national roadmap for women's economic participation in the renewable energy sector, a new area. And we have launched a $30 million, to start with, US dollars green economy financing facility in this country to support gender-inclusive green finance for households and small private sector companies investing in green technology solutions. In a broader regional context, we are pursuing various policy initiatives under the Central Asia Women in Business program we launched in 2019. And EBRD is in active dialogue also with the national authorities of Kyrgyz Republic, Mongolia, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan to create systemic changes and break down legal and regulatory barriers faced by women entrepreneurs. And let me assure you, at least this is how it seems to us, that support for female entrepreneurship and financial inclusion are climbing up high on the agendas in all Central Asian states. I would like to finish by expressing my gratitude to all our partners in Kazakhstan, which support us and help us push women's economic empowerment agenda. This is a global trend, which Kazakhstan has taken on board, and this is the only way forward to make it a better place to live for all people, regardless of their age or gender. Thank you very much, Gaukhar.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hargitai. This is very, very empowering indeed for women entrepreneurs, especially in the region, with all the programs that EBRD has in place, and especially the recent loan that you had signed with the Bank Center Credit. I think it is encouraging for women entrepreneurs. So far throughout, half our session, we heard the perspective from the government, representative of an international financial institution, and most of the attention was on the women entrepreneurs, on the access to the funding, which seems, from what I hear already, is not a big issue from what's available from the government and from the development institution. It is an issue that is being addressed. I would like to move to speak about the corporate world and the women in the finance, in the corporate finance. And here we have with us, fortunately, Ms. Julie Monaco, the managing director of the City Public Sector Group. And Ms. Monaco would like to ask you to share with us your perspective of women advancement in the finance sector. City is the most global bank with the first ever women CEO. And would you share with us, please, how is women empowerment in the global corporate sector?
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for asking me to join this morning. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here to share, as I was share some of my thoughts. And as I was preparing for this morning, I was actually thinking about the fact that, for 36 years in my career in banking, how much it has changed in finance. When I joined banking in 1985, there were very few women, and the women that were in finance in New York, where I started my career, I didn't appreciate at the time, probably until 20 years later, what pioneers they were. And most people don't really remember this in the U.S. They think of the U.S. as, that women in the U.S. have advanced. But thinking through some of the things discussed this morning, I'll give you the backdrop that in 1972, a woman couldn't open a bank account or open a credit card account in the United States without her husband or her father approving that, right? So in the last 50 years, we've come a long way, not just in the U.S., but around the world. And hopefully some of these things that we've seen progress are going to accelerate, and we're certainly seeing that. I see a momentous change since 2016, when the United Nations put gender right at the top of the SDG goals in terms of SDG number 5, because I actually think that the world aligning around the Sustainable Development Goals and corporates saying we're going to achieve the sustainability goals, and financial institutions like Citi saying we are going to empower our clients to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals has moved the world of finance and moved the world of corporations around the SDGs, of which SDG number 5 is front and center. So I think that right now is the best time to be a woman in finance in terms of of your career opportunities, and a woman entrepreneur. And I'm just going to give you a few examples. The way we look at economic empowerment of women at Citi is threefold. First, we look at what are we doing within our own house? How are we achieving gender equality in SDG number 5 for the women who come to Citi? And that has been an ongoing, I've been with Citi for 15 years now, through the Citi Women chapters that we have in every single country we're operating in 98 countries. I think we feel proud at Citi that we have helped promote gender equality around the world. One is the fact that we have, out of our chief country officers, out of the 100 and something chief country officers, we have almost 40% of them are women. Our chief country officer for Saudi Arabia is a woman. And we feel that we have been sort of, through our participation in countries around the world, been promoting women into careers and really being the example for the local markets that we're operating in terms of providing opportunities for women. And two is Citi was the first firm to publish the equity around equity pay, the raw numbers. And what we said is we don't have an equal pay for equal job issue, but we have a representation issue, and no other firm was willing to produce those numbers. And we did that a few years ago and said, we're going to close that pay gap, and we are measuring that every single quarter. It is being put into people's metrics in terms of managers own these metrics and how to address it. I think the Sustainable Development Goals, again, helped frame this, because we now, we always say that you don't achieve something unless you measure it. We're now measuring it. All of the speakers that came before me have all these statistics that are from these different organizations about women's access to finance, women's representation. When you start measuring that, then you can come up with, and you see how bad the numbers are, you can start coming up with solutions, and we're seeing those solutions. So at Citi, we see that it has changed dramatically in terms of the representation, and obviously there's no better way to exemplify that in Jane Fraser being the first woman CEO on Wall Street, but also the board of directors of Citi is 50% women. So we are continuing on that journey. And what we do, what's really important for a global organization, and we're seeing this throughout corporate America and other corporations around the world, that as they go global, if you set a global standard for what you want, you're going to raise the lower bar, right? So you talked about the fact that it's 20% globally in terms of representation, and that it's worse in Central Asia. But at Citi, we have the same standard for Kazakhstan that we have for the US, right? And we have it everywhere in the world, and that helps raise it. So I think that's a really key role that corporate America is playing, as well as other corporations around the world that are global multinationals. The other lens that we look at, in addition to how we're making sure that women at Citi achieve equality and that we have the right mix at Citi, is looking at our clients and how are we enabling clients. And again, that comes to looking at what percentage of accounts, what percentage of loans are going to women-owned businesses. We have specific programs we've announced through our we have a dedicated inclusive finance group, and that inclusive finance group has become more and more focused on gender and looking at women-owned businesses and tracking that versus our total business. And I think that's incredibly important, because again, we're not going to achieve economic equality and achieve SDG number 5 unless we're tracking what percentage of our clients are women, and what percentage of the accounts, whether it's in our private bank, our small business, and other private companies, even in our institutional clients group, are women owned and women driven. And if you track that and you move the needle as you start tracking that and you try to move towards it. The other trends that I'm seeing is a few things just recently, which is very interesting, is we've had clients starting to tell us in the corporate world to not bother showing up for a pitch if the pitch team doesn't have a woman on it. So we're starting to see a change in behavior in the finance world, in the world of investment banking, in the world of finance in general, that everyone is starting to walk the talk. right? It's one thing to talk about gender equality, but it's another thing to take concrete actions and put policies in place. And and as we start measuring all of the attributes that are going to lead to SDG number 5 in terms of gender equality, as more and more firms take those measurements and put them into their SDG scoring, and as we all know, ESG investing is becoming very, very important for investors. Gender is at the center of that, right? And so what I've seen over the last 2 years is we had already been heavily involved in working with organizations like EBRD and the AIFC and the DFC in the United States on gender programs for financing. And we announced a few years ago a program to put about $500 million worth of loans into women-owned businesses across Latin America together with DFC. We've done programs with IFC, but we're also seeing that we're doing a lot of lending into banks who are on lending to women-owned businesses in a lot of the emerging markets. And we, recently did with a development bank in Mexico, we had them actually raise the funding for those loans in the capital markets with a gender bond. So we're seeing more interest in gender bonds and in the capital markets, more interest in raising capital funding for funding ways that we're going to close this gender gap. I see that all as positive. I think that we're going to be able to accelerate the time frame. I know the United Nations has a goal that by 2030 to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We've got a lot of work to do between now and 2030 if we're going to do that. I know one of their goals also is to remove any laws that discriminate against women by then. Sounds like we're making significant progress on some of that in Kazakhstan and other places, but we all have to continue to work towards it. And I think that there is an incredible amount of opportunity for the entrepreneurs that are in the audience today. I think that there are so many programs that are being announced and so many ways that they can get access to funding. And now for the first time, it feels like in the last 3 years that it is more reality than talk. And that's because people are finally measuring the outcome. And when you start measuring the outcome, and you're measuring yourself against it, and you need that for your SDG scores, people are putting more financing and more activity behind it. So I'm feeling very optimistic about it.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. I think you raised one of the most important issues about measurement of progress, of the policies that are being introduced in the areas of women empowerment, in all areas of the economy and social policies. And FMA, where I work, is a London-based firm, and we do policies for developing countries and developed countries as well. And I would like to emphasize how important are the standards. It is the standards that make the change in every society and in every policy. So by setting those high standards, by aligning that benchmark through developing world, I think we can accelerate the development women globally. With thanks, and with that, I would like to propose our next speaker, Ms. Alina Anikina, who is the chair of the Alpha Bank Kazakhstan. Alpha Bank Kazakhstan has been in Kazakhstan one of the first banks actually to be operating in independent Kazakhstan, and would like to ask Alina to share her story of success within Alpha Bank and her experience in Kazakhstan.
Okay, thank you so much, but my report will be in Russian. Thank you for the invitation. Безусловно, мир финансов радикально изменился и меняется до сих пор, за что отдельное спасибо всем вам, всем участникам, всем тем, кто принимает в этом активное участие. И отдельное спасибо Мадине Абylkassymовне, потому что я представляю, насколько сложная задача перед ней стоит, и спасибо ей за ее современный и профессиональный взгляд на мир финансов и на финансовый сектор в целом в Казахстане. На сегодня среди клиентов Альфа-Банк Казахстана доля женщин-предпринимателей почти 50%, без малого, 43%. Причем большая часть из этой группы – это женщины-индивидуальные предприниматели, которые создают свой собственный бизнес, воплощая в реальность свои идеи. Я уверена, что в будущем эта цифра будет расти. Но уже сейчас понятно, что женщины готовы, хотят и прекрасно могут заниматься бизнесом. Из нашей клиентской базы я могу сказать, что ряд крупных компаний Казахстана, например, в фармацевтическом, строительном и FMCG секторах, возглавляются женщинами, что, безусловно, говорит о свободе, о возможности, об открытости и о том, что многие преграды уже сейчас там не существуют и ушли в прошлое. Готовясь к этому выступлению, я посмотрела данные Trust Insight on Wealth and Worth фонда, которые говорят о том, что успешные женщины оказывают положительное влияние на мир с помощью бизнеса больше даже, чем мужчины, потому что женщины склонны к тому, чтобы делать свой вклад в соответствии с их ценностями, в то время как для мужчин есть некое преимущество и разделение. Не делят инвестиции, это одно направление и бизнес, а моральные и политические ценности это другое направление. Ну, собственно, это есть там высказывание директора генерального Pax World Management. Что значит, когда весь мир переживает перемены, да, что значит возможность там, дать работать женщинам, дать равные возможности? Безусловно, там, в условиях пандемии в наших руках мы можем менять, наверное, ход событий, даже, не побоюсь этого слова, ход истории. Время сейчас там, позволяет нам показывать свои сильные стороны в бизнесе, и мне кажется, что женщина, предприниматель, она может дать заботу, которую она проявляет к своим детям, любовь, которая окружает весь мир, и поддержка практически во всех направлениях. Что мы можем сделать как финансовый институт для того, чтобы были доступны и прозрачные банковские услуги? Ну, безусловно, там, мы идем в область цифровизации. Наши услуги как финансового института доступны любому гражданину, любому казахстанцу. Вот. И мы хотим, чтобы наши продукты и сервисы помогали жить не просто легко там, и быстро делать какие-то переводы. Да? Мы хотим, чтобы это были действия, которые были бы там, в удовольствие и позволяли бы женщинам не только развивать свой бизнес, но и наслаждаться жизнью, делать какие-то финансовые операции быстро, легко, не задумываясь о том, что это сложная, тяжелая финансовая процедура. Мы создаем специальные лаборатории UX, которые изучают поведение наших клиентов, в том числе и женщин. Мы смотрим, как они реагируют на наши продукты, смотрим, что можно улучшить. Если говорить про меня лично, то поездка в Казахстан это был для меня вызов, безусловно, поменять там страну жительства. Я приехала из России, это ну, в СНГ, мне кажется, сейчас уже это стало нормальным, но 10 лет назад это было еще, так сказать, прорывным таким действием. Я с первых, наверное, дней влюбилась в Казахстан, и я обожаю свою работу, мне нравится моя команда, мне нравится банк, но за этим всем стоит 3 высших образования, 3 иностранных языка и усердная работа, которая позволяет мне, я надеюсь, быть профессионалом в моем деле. И, собственно, мои родители, наверное, которым я хочу тоже сказать большое спасибо, воспитывали меня как человека, который отвечает за свои поступки, сам строит свое будущее. И ну, я надеюсь, что моя работа, мой пример и то, как я работаю с командой и с коллегами, позволит транслировать это и сказать всем девушкам, женщинам, у которых есть идеи, у которых есть мечты, что они могут этого добиться, что они должны мечтать, должны воплощать в жизнь свои идеи, а мы их во всем будем поддерживать.
That is a beautiful, beautiful speech. Thank you so much. Actually, from what we began with, that we are now living in an unprecedented time with opportunities for women. And thank you for sharing your personal story. I have a few questions to all our speakers. We did discuss the access to finance for women. We realized that assets and collateral, as well as education, financial literacy is one of the issues that required more attention, despite all the efforts by the governments and the financial institutions in the region addressing the issue. So I would like to propose 3 questions. First being on the access to capital. You said that, Ms. Abylkassymova said that the problem with the economic assets, what are the policies or what education measures can the government of Kazakhstan and other governments in the region introduce in order to ensure the larger representation of women in property and assets?
Thank you very much for your question. First of all, let me take this opportunity to really thank the participants of the session for very insightful speeches. And it is important that the issue of economic empowerment of women, it is supported not only at the government level, but it is what we see today is at the corporate sector and the banks, be it banks or corporations or international financial organizations. So the drivers of the change is not only public sector, the driver is now the corporate sector. And it is very important when we talk about the issue of financial empowerment and economic empowerment of women. Speaking about the issue of women ownership, it is overall, it is a part of a broader issue of ownership of assets and the issue of equality and equality overall on a state level, in the economy, in a government policy. When we talk about the any policy, our ultimate goal is raising the income of people. Our ultimate goal of any state, of any government, of any policy is raising the well-being of its population for any country, for any economy, well-being of its population. But when we try to measure what is a well-being, it's not only GDP growth. So it cannot be GDP growth. The GDP growth very often used as a proxy for measurement. But however, the well-being and the equality in the country, in the economy, in any nation, should be measured also through the access and the ownership of different assets, how the distribution of assets within the economy. While we often try to measure it through the growth of real income of population, the growth in salaries, also, I mean, even if you don't look at the gender perspective overall on a broader, be it women or men, when we, if we start look at this issue as a distribution and as a distribution of assets within the country and the access through these assets from gender perspective, then the issue becomes even more complex. Many countries, they try to achieve the raising of well-being of its population overall without a gender aspect, without consideration of a gender perspective. Some countries, they don't have this priority in their public policy, looking at the distribution of assets among different classes of population. The issue you are raising today about the access to assets, ownership of assets, it has a very direct link to economic empowerment of women. What we saw from the past experience is that women, if they don't have assets, if they don't have their own properties, they don't have any other real estate, they cannot get an access not only to credit, but overall they become very dependent on their partners, and very often they cannot make free choices in their life, right? They cannot, because they're very dependent in terms of the property on their husband or first in their families, on their fathers, parents, and then on their husbands. Very often they cannot make free choices in their life in terms of the selection of career paths in their life, right? I mean, they are limited even in their opportunities to make their own choice of education, be it a job, be it area where they want to really.
Absolutely
yes,
right.
Yes. The area where they want to really choose their life path, right? So, and this is not the case. I would say this is less the case for Kazakhstan, but it is a huge issue in a number of developing countries and a number of developing economies. More specifically, on the issue of ownership of property, I don't have data with me on distribution, on shares of ownership with regards to men and women ownership. But I can say that we see that it is a problem. We see that in Kazakhstan, women have, because they have less ownership of assets, they're likely to get less access to credit because of the lack of the collateral that they can use.
Absolutely. I mean, thank you so much. You raised one of the most sensitive issues in every society is the financial security that women feel in their respective societies. Not only in relation to access to credit or access to funding, but in general, social security within their own families, within their own communities and societies. Thank you very much for raising this important issue. I mean, this basically leads us to the main idea behind women empowerment. The ability of women to make decisions about their own lives because they have the ability for the financial independence.
Yes, financial independence. So it is very closely related to this issue.
Yes, and that leads to the equal pay, the entrepreneurial opportunities, and of course the financial literacy to manage their assets and their funds. Thank you. I mean, it is indeed a very valuable point that you raised. Thank you so much for speaking up about this issue. My second question was about career opportunities. Our colleagues at JP Morgan said that they practice mentorship within the corporate world because unlike entrepreneurship, which is more horizontal, the corporate world is very hierarchical, and usually women are absent from what is called informal networks within the corporate world. So men often have their activities that they can take part in after the hours, whereas women often are not present because of their commitments at home and because they don't share the same interests, and therefore they introduced the JP Morgan corporate mentorship for career advancement of women. So this question I would be happy to address to Ms. Hargitai and to Ms. Monaco about share please how it is done at EBRD, one of the leading IFIs, and at Citi. How do you help your junior and advancing colleagues for the higher offices in your respective banks?
I'll start. I think that we've had programs in place for as long as I've been at Citi and prior when I was at JP Morgan and other banks. Those programs have been in place in terms of mentorship because there was actually a report that came out of Women on Wall Street that said that one of the reasons why women weren't breaking through the glass ceiling was around this informal networking. And I think that there's a few things happening that are in women's advantage. One is that we at Citi have succession plans and talent reviews every year. And we look at our diverse talents, of which women are part of that talent, and we look at the fact that we look at women who are highly rated in the job that they're doing and how long they've been in that job. And if a woman's been in that job for longer than 3 years, their manager and others are assigned to them to mentor them and figure out how do they get to the next level. And that's the only way we're going to change the numbers in terms of more representation at the senior levels. You have to measure it and you have to look at it. The reason why looking at that is that women often just keep their heads down and continue working and are not always looking for the next job. Often when I've had senior women working for me, or I've been managing large teams, I was amazed sometimes where a major job would come open and a woman wouldn't raise her hand who I knew could do the job. And I would ask them and they say, but I'm barely holding on by my fingernails right now with the kids and the home and the job. I can't possibly take on a more senior job. And I would say to them, but look at me. I have to sleep the same number of hours you do a day. I have a child at home. It's not about doing more when you go into a more senior job. Everybody has the same number of hours. You have to be confident that you can step into that type of role and it'll actually give you more flexibility. So mentoring women to actually be their own advocates and give them the confidence. And what has been shown, and the reason why women don't break through that top level sometimes is not about the bias, but about giving them the confidence to manage their own careers in that way. And so we have a lot of mentoring programs, a lot of programs where where people outside the direct manager are assigned to a woman who is performing well. And again, watching very closely if they stay in a job for too long and what that next move is and what are the gaps and how do we move them there, because it's the only, it's just the only way that you're going to move the numbers in doing that type of mentoring. And then the final thing I would say, one other thing is around this informal networking. The next generation that's coming in, even beyond the millennials, that informal networking is becoming less and less important because women are finally recognizing what it's going to take to make it in the business world, and that is forcing their husbands to play the role of 50% parent. So less and less men are spending 8 hours on golf courses because they have working wives who also have careers, and they have to participate more in the family. And I think we're seeing the next generation of men want to do that, ones that are taking paternity leave, and we have to help and support them that they're not discriminated against. But I think that helps so that women aren't locked out of certain types of networking. And finally, I think that I always advise women to look at ways to solve problems for your clients and solve problems for the firms and do meaningful networking around business. And that will build out your network in a way that's much more meaningful than going out to a bar drinking or going on a golf course.
That's brilliant indeed. The importance of our partners in supporting careers.
Yes.
I think it's something indeed once more one of those sensitive issues again. That you raised. Thank you very much for doing that. And Ms. Hargitai, what can you say about mentorship in EBRD? And I mean, I know your predecessor, Mr. Bruno Balvanera, and we worked together with him as well. And now we're happy to see you, a woman at the head of the EBRD in Central Asia. So how does it work in EBRD?
Thank you very much. EBRD actually has stepped up the gender focus only for the last 9 years. I hope that there are not many predecessors of mine who are listening to it. And a fair share was about very conscious kind of screening of candidates for senior positions, leadership positions, which had not happened before. Number two is what also Julie mentioned. There was an initiative of informal women kind of in business network that focused on two things, and you may be laughing at me. One is something that Julie mentioned, how to speak up. And the other one was that, according to what I have read and many other colleagues of mine have read, the imposter syndrome, which seems to be affecting women more than men. Lack of self-confidence. We feel that when we are performing, we have to just prepare more. We are not as good as. So actually we had councils, those who joined, and also some of the male colleagues wanted to join it, because this imposter syndrome kind of, I'm not fully confident in myself, I'm always not yet ready for the next step. We felt at EBRD that it was very much present. Two things I would like to leave with you, and we have the mentorships now, and it has been formalized, and that's why we were very happy. Yes, she's a high quality business leader, but she's also a female. Odile, who has been heading our bank now for the last half a year, but two things come to my mind. Number one is we are going back, as I guess many of you, to hybrid working. Now, there is also the absolute positive about it, that we do not have to go to the office each and every day unless we are hairdressers, because it's very difficult to do it in a virtual world. But how would it impact equality? Does it give us a chance, or it will be the female part of the family or those who would be staying at home? So at EBRD, we are looking at it. There have been some surveys of how they want to use it, how we can encourage, what Julie mentioned, share the golf course time with me or with our family and the responsibilities. But we are looking at it now through the lens of returning to work post-COVID. And number two is we had to take some drastic measures, actually, a lot of convincing for our male colleagues to take paternity leave. So no, it has not been made obviously obligatory, but there has been questions, there has been the gentle nudging, because most of them, all of them practically, they have women, wives that have their own careers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It has been a very insightful session. I mean, with Alina beginning the issue with education and hard work, with all of you contributing about the importance of financial independence, security, about the support of partners, speaking up, and all of that from the personal perspective, as well as access to capital and asset ownership, and measuring policies, raising standards, and giving access indeed to finance and entrepreneurial opportunities for women empowerment in the region and globally is something very valuable for all of us as, in the world. I would like to thank all the speakers for today's insightful session. I believe it was inspiring to see all of you, for all the young women who are watching us right now, and for men who are willing to support their their sisters, their wives and daughters. At that, I would like to close our session. We're a little bit forward with our time, and invite to the session on women tomorrow, called Women, Peace and Security, which will be held at 6 p.m. Nur-Sultan time, with the participation of the AIFC Governor, Mr. Kairat Kilimbetov, and the U.S. government official, Special Representative for the United Nations and Secretary General for Central Asia. I believe it will be a very exciting session as well, with the developments in Afghanistan and what's happening in the region. Thank you to all of you, and I hope we will meet again soon on the professional or the social fields.
Thank you very much.